Hello and welcome to Mariology without apologies. This is Dr. Mark Miravalle. I have a very special guest with me today. I have Mr. Michael O'Neill, better known as the Miracle Hunter. And I have to say, when I've bumped into Michael, like even we're mutually at a conference or something like that, I wish you could just mic our conversation when we're backstage, because I think it's probably more interesting than what we say on stage, because we're able to just kind of let it fly. So that's our goal for this program of Mariology Without Apology regarding Marian Apparitions. Also, we'll dabble with a few Eucharistic miracles as well. So, Michael, thanks for being with us. Great to have you.
It's great to be with you. Yeah, and I enjoy those conversations as well. So let's try to replicate that here today.
Absolutely. That's great. Yeah. I always held, they should just fake us out, say we're going to a conference, just mic us during the meals, and people would be far more interested in what we're saying. So anyway,
but they might not be ready for it though. So
yeah, right. True enough. So let's start with Marian Apparitions. And quite frankly, you've done the best job in the world in documenting accurately reported apparitions that are approved, apparitions that are not approved. It's really, it's been a universal service. And thanks for that in the name of kind of humanity in the church. Let's talk a little bit about numbers. So how many approved apparitions, and I'm talking ballpark, you'll probably give me specifics, but how many approved apparitions do we have historically versus how many approved apparitions do we have in like the last 100 years?
So I'll try to answer the question from a bird's eye view first, is that if we rely on some of the scholarship of Father René Laurentin, who has passed away just a few years ago at the age of 100, perhaps the world's foremost Mariologist. He's written this dictionary of Marian apparitions, and in his dictionary, he lists something over 2,000 Marian apparitions that have been reported throughout Christian history. And through my work on miraclehunter.com, I've looked at his list and I've looked at other lists, and obviously things have been happening in this last century, as you're mentioning. And so my list comes up to about 2,500 Marian apparitions that have been claimed throughout history. And of course, this does not in any way say that these are approved apparitions. I think that we have even cases that didn't make it on my list. The things that make it on my list are things that have been reported in the media. So we have cases where people have experiences at home that don't make it onto my list. After I was featured in National Geographic, and we did a map of all the Marian apparitions in history in that magazine, I got so many emails saying, I saw Mary too. And that's not to doubt that they did or had an experience, but I only report on the ones that have caught some attention of the church or the media, perhaps. Those are the ones that make the list. So we're about 2,500 throughout Christian history. Now, when we talk about approved apparitions, we have to, of course, limit it to after 1545 to 1563, the Council of Trent. That was the very first time that the church actually formalized the process for investigating Marian apparitions. Perhaps prior to that, it was somewhat of a popular acclaim. A priest or a bishop could investigate something happening on the local level. Maybe the local parishioners or the faithful gathered to pray and said, is this a miracle? Yes. Miracolo, we have a miracle. And perhaps through tradition, we have those things being carried down even today. So we have apparitions like Our Lady to St. Simon's Stock with the brown scapular. This is an early apparition, but one that we consider to be an approved one, but it's never been investigated. And it's only traditionally that we consider it. So if we consider the cases after 1545 to 1563, we're dealing with sometime like 27 cases where the local bishop has given some sort of a formulation. It's not always perfect. It's not always that constat de supernaturalitate, that Latin phrase that would indicate it is established as supernatural and worthy of belief for the Christian faithful. But 27 times or so, we've seen a local bishop give a declaration like that, or a sign of approval that we can consider this to be an authentic apparition. And of course, as you know, Dr. Miravalle, when we talk about Marian apparitions, the local bishop is the first and foremost authority in the approval of these claims. So we don't need the Vatican to weigh in on that. So when the Vatican does, it kind of pours cement, I say, on a bishop's statement. If there has been no pouring of that cement from the Vatican, a sign of golden rose, a visit of a pope, a statement from the CDF, the canonization of a visionary, a feast day. Without that cement, as we will talk about later in this program, the CDF, or the DDF, as we might say now, it can flip it over and say that it is no longer approved, or a later bishop could come in, swoop in, and say it is no longer approved. So until that Vatican cement happens, that can happen. But in the cases of the Vatican doing that, showing some formal support, we have something like 16 cases throughout history where the Vatican has actually, with a document, with a visit of a pope, with some other sign of recognition, has actually said that this is a true apparition as recognized by the bishop.
Okay, yeah, that's great. That's a nice kind of existential, metaphysical playground by which to examine what's been going on more recently. So, as you mentioned, and this used to be easy in class, in Mariology class, you'd say, look, yeah, you'd put up constat de supernaturalitate, right? Which means it's approved. Non constat de supernaturalitate, which is that's what the press loves to get screwed up, and fair enough, they don't have their Latin down, but they assume that means that it's been prohibited. But the non constat is, as you know, the middle category. It's not approved.
Yeah, the maybe, yeah.
It's the maybe category. I call it the Gamaliel category. If it's of God, you're not going to stop this thing, and if it's not, so it'll die off. So, and then there's the constat de non supernaturalitate. But within those three categories, bishops don't always take a class on Marian apparitions, and so you don't always get a nice, neat, clean constat, non-constat, or constat de non. So, for example, there's statements where they say, like the first approval at Amsterdam was, you are free in conscience to accept this devotion. Now, that's a pretty guarded statement in a certain sense, but it's certainly more than nothing, or it's certainly not a prohibition. It's a stepping stone, right, towards something positive. Or some bishops will say, she appeared here that day. This, they will positively confirm that this is authentic. Others will say there's nothing against faith and morals, so you're free to do it. So it's not so neat and clean oftentimes, and that's why, quite frankly, I think your website is such a value, because you give the ink. You click the apparition, you have specifically, what is clear up to this point.
And that's one of the reasons I developed the website in the first place, is because even on the Vatican website, and there's no official even document or catalog in the Vatican where they have, or that I'm aware of, that they have all the Marian apparitions listed out. So I was curious for my own interest, and I just loaded the website with as much information as I could, and it's kind of caught fire. People who want to know about Marian apparitions can go there. But I think it is so interesting that it's as clear as mud. That's what I'd like to say, that
yeah.
Nobody really understands. And there's this 1978 document, of course, the Norms of the Congregation for Proceeding and Judging Alleged Private Revelations and Apparitions, that came out, and that went to all the bishops. They have that document, but I think it's probably due time for them to revise that document with clarity and get it back out to the bishops for the next apparition that happens.
Yeah, so let's go there. Let's talk about that document. In that document, as you mentioned, Father Laurentin, I had Father Laurentin come to Franciscan University and give a class on apparitions, and he, in his typically eloquent French fashion, wrote down a few words on the board, but he basically came up with three categories, which, quite frankly, doesn't fit exactly into the 78 norms. And for our listeners, again, as Michael mentioned, 1978, there are these Cardinal Sepper norms, because he was the head of the CDF at that time. It's about a 3-4-page document that gives indications of what to look for positively, what to look for negatively. And I'm going to ask you to comment on that in just a moment. But Father Laurentin, wrote on the board, you have message contents, you have phenomena, and you have fruits, which is a pretty good short version of what the CDF came out with. But give us a summary of the CDF norms, in that 78 separate document.
Thank you. And people can go to miraclehunter.com to read that entire document in Latin or in English. It was originally released sub secreto to all the bishops of the world, but like everything else, it's been leaked and it's now on the Vatican website as well. So, but people could go to the Vatican site or my site to read that. And so what that does is it's the basic rule book that the bishops have for investigating a Marian apparition. So we're talking about, they want to make sure that there's nothing contrary to faith and morals in the messages. And they also want to make sure that the visionaries are living morally upstanding lives, that they're not pursuing this for financial gain, and that they're not plain crazy, that there's no psychological disorder which may be leading them towards this. And so all these things are laid out in the document in great detail of all the various steps that need to happen, the escalation from the local bishop, perhaps the bishops' conference, and then to the Vatican, and also all these details relating to the content of the messages and the life of the visionary. So it's all in there, and that's really what the church uses. We talk about Our Lady of Good Help, the 1859 apparition in Champion, Wisconsin, the only approved one in the history of the United States. I was there on December 8th in 2010, and I witnessed the Mass celebrated by Bishop David L. Rickon from the Diocese of Green Bay. And you could tell that he had studied the norms, because in his official statement, he clearly laid out the fact that of the various aspects that the norms spell out. And he said that this apparition certainly meets all the criteria. So it's good to know that some bishops are reading that anyway. But like you say, I think an update to that might be appropriate at this time.
Right. So let's go there too, because I'm glad you mentioned, because in that second, or maybe it's the third section of the document, it talks about jurisdiction. Who's got jurisdiction over these, and it specifies that the local bishop has the first jurisdiction, the first discernment, and in a certain sense, it nuances that that really suffices unless there's need for the Holy See to enter. And so oftentimes what will happen is if the Holy See does see a need to enter, if they think that, the commission wasn't done appropriately or whatnot, they can either dish it over to the Episcopal Conference, like what happened with Medjugorje, right? Initially, the Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Zadar Conference in 91, or they can kind of take it over. And actually, in a certain sense, the Medjugorje example fits both of those, because they first gave it to the bishops and then they kind of took it over. But there's also an interesting, I don't think it's unfair to call it a nuance in there. Well, it's more than nuance, it's an instruction that only the Holy See can overturn a statement of the bishop. So that means if the new bishop of Fatima decided, in my discernment, I don't think it's legit. Well, he can't technically overturn the last bishop statement, back in 1930. But in a certain sense, the Vatican kinda can. Notice my precision, kinda can. So comments on that. How does that go down?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that in these cases where the Vatican has never commented or shown any signs of recognition, in a case like Lipa, for example, 1948 in the Philippines, we never saw any of those things happen where the Vatican, through the CDF, released a statement saying that this was established as supernatural. And a pope never visited. They never sent an emissary with a golden rose. They didn't canonize the visionary, Teresita Castillo. They didn't canonize her. They didn't set up a feast day. They didn't build a basilica on the site. So without any of these signs of recognition, yes, the Vatican on some very rare occasions has done that, where they've re-examined, or there's new evidence perhaps potentially that could come out, and they'd re-examine. But this is a very rare thing that could happen.
And so, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, once a bishop has made a positive statement, which would include the following three, to my mind. First of all, Lipa, that you mentioned, because the Archbishop Argüelles came out with a statement after doing a commission of constat, essentially. Then you have Itaporanga, which is the case in Brazil, where the bishop does a very strong praising of the visionary, talks about Our Lady, does not come out with a constat statement, but certainly approves the building of a shrine there. Thirdly is the Lady of All Nations. And let me upset the Thomists that might be listening by flipping that order, and we'll go existential for a second. So let's go to the third. Let's go to the third, Michael. So with the Lady of All Nations, and you had the bishop, Bishop Hendricks, with an interview with your EWTN program. So what appears to have happened in that case is that the local bishop, Bishop Punt, approves it as constat, clearly constat, in 2002. It had been anticipated with a conscience statement that you could accept it by conscience in 1996 by the bishop then, Bishop Bomers, and Bishop Punt was an auxiliary bishop. So then you go 18 years as an approved apparition, and you have cardinals, curial cardinals from Rome coming to the prayer day in Amsterdam. And you have universal distribution. You have over 50 imprimaturs of the prayer of the Lady of All Nations. Then in December of 2020, a new bishop comes in. There seems to be some, quote, dialogue between the DDF and him, stronger on the DDF side than him, perhaps. And then all of a sudden you get a new statement. And the new statement is that it is no longer a constat statement, but it's kicked back to the middle category, non-constat. And this was based on a supposed confirmation by Paul VI, now Saint Pope Paul VI. Can you comment on how that interview went with the bishop, with the new bishop, and whether he ever saw that confirmation note from Paul VI of saying this is on a disciplinary level, no longer approved, but in that middle category?
Sure. So I think that my memory of that interview was that the bishop was very positive towards these apparitions. I don't think that he spoke definitively. He was very obedient to the church in this moment. He wasn't saying this is something that I firmly believe and they went against me. He said nothing like this, but he did speak very positively of the devotion and of the faithful's belief in the apparitions. But related to the Paul VI letter that you're referencing, he said that he has not seen it. So that's an unfortunate thing, of course, that the bishop in the diocese where the apparition occurred, where there was a positive approval, had not personally seen the letter that was the basis for the turning down of this apparition approval. So it's a complicated scenario, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful, because indeed, certainly the bishop before Bishop Bomers, this is the bishop of the 90s, right? He never saw anything like that. Bishop Punt, who was bishop for 25 years, never saw anything from Paul VI. Cardinal Ratzinger, who told Bishop Punt he could do the 1996 statement of conscience. In all that time, there was never a statement of that Paul VI has confirmed this disciplinary action. To make it more complicated, just if people are not confused enough, it's a disciplinary matter, right? So a disciplinary matter is not a doctrine. A disciplinary matter can change. You know, we know that Faustina's Divine Mercy was on the index for almost 20 years. So even, and John the 23rd confirmed that at the time. And again, that's Saint John the 23rd. So what's the point? The point is these things happen and they should be taken as definitive. And in this case, it's particularly confusing because no one has seen this Paul VI confirmation statement. Do I have those facts right? Does that sound?
Yeah, I think that's right. So it is a confusing time for the faithful who have a devotion to Our Lady of All Nations. We It is definitely an unprecedented turn of events, in my opinion.
Yeah. And so, and as well with the other two, we had that overview, and up until 2017 or 2018, we never had a case of a bishop giving a constat and then having the Vatican turn it over because it was easy in class. That category was the done category. That's the number one category. And now you got to make the proviso, not necessarily. Any thoughts as to why this would be kind of a new hesitancy for approval, or in various cases? And I know some of this can be very human, right? Because it can depend on who the prefect is to some degree. But any thoughts why this new precedent of overturning positive statements by bishops?
For some reason, and I can't say this is based on anything at all, which is kind of an embarrassing admission in an interview, when I saw that there were bishop-approved apparitions that the Vatican had never commented on, even Our Lady of Good Help in Champion, Wisconsin, when the Pope visited the United States, he went to Philadelphia and Boston and New York. He could have made a little side trip to Champion, Wisconsin and Green Bay and given it those optics, that sign of approval by walking on the property. But he didn't do that. He didn't dedicate the United States to Our Lady of Champion, as she's known now, and or Adele Bryce. He could have canonized her when he showed up, but he didn't do those things. Yeah. And so I kind of have always had this sense that when the Vatican has made efforts to not give a little statement or celebrate an anniversary, as popes often do when there's an anniversary of an apparition, they'll send a golden rose, they'll send their wishes, they'll compose a prayer. When I see that doesn't happen, to me, that's always indicated that there was a chance that the Vatican might do something in those rare cases. Again, that's just my own personal take on things. And that's why I've always had on my website, the Vatican must show these signs of approval in order for the Vatican recognition to be there. Yeah. So we talk about the case of Lipa in the Philippines. Strangely enough, I was in the Philippines visiting. I visited that shrine in Lipa at the exact time, about a week later, after that approval came through. That was just dumb luck, because you have to make a big plan to travel to the Philippines. It's a 20-hour flight, and it's almost like jumping in a time machine. You're there in a different day when you arrive. But so I was there during the time of approval. And I actually interviewed Bishop Raymond Arguelles on my radio show later. And I asked him on the radio show, I said, why did you make this approval? Because it had actually been given the fully negative statement of constat de non supernaturalitate. It was not the known constat. So he was upgrading it 2 steps, in my opinion, from the definitely no to the maybe to the positive. So that was a big leap. That had never happened before in history, in my opinion. And so I asked him, what changed? What new evidence did you look at? What was different? And he said, I've always had a great devotion to Our Lady under this title, and I believe the time was right to make this announcement. So he didn't cite anything concrete, unfortunately. And then I said, so I assume you worked with the CDF then to work this out, to get the approval. And I asked him several times in several ways, and he never really confirmed the collaboration with the CDF. So based on those two aspects, it seems like out of his great love for Mary, especially under this title, and with his opportunity as bishop, he advanced it ahead, perhaps without going through the proper channels. And as a result of doing this, unfortunately, Bishop Arguelles is a good man and a good bishop. You can see his record. He's been a great bishop. The Vatican did not like that. And within a couple of months, they not only flipped that from the positive all the way back to the negative judgment, but he was removed from office for this activity. So this was a very strange turn of events, but it's my understanding, based on my interview, that perhaps he had not gone through the proper channels to do the approval.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because I've also made that trip and gone to that shrine in Lipa in the 20-hour gig, as you mentioned, and talked with Teresita there. And this is perhaps for another Mariology Without Apology Rosary and Beer session, but it is a fascinating history, and complicated is British understatement, because everyone accepted it as authentic in the early years, and including 5 bishops who were close proximate to the event. Then a papal legate came from Rome and said, overturn it, and threatened the visionary. And actually 2 of those bishops, there was actually 5 who had to sign something saying, we no longer accept this. All 5 bishops, before their death, one before a civil court, he wanted it done in court, signed that he did this under duress, that he completely believed in it. He saw the miracles, he saw the healings, and he was completely in favor of this. So it's a bit of a Hollywood drama of how that went, and it goes back to that point we said before. The bishop technically doesn't have to, but it's always advised, consult with the DDF before he does his task. I know I'm dealing with a bishop who has what I think are authentic mystical phenomena in a European country, and the bishop went to the DDF and said, make a statement. And they said, no, you make a statement, you do it. And so he was trying to kind of give it off. So, I mean, hence is the human dimension of the church, right? I mean, these are interesting elements, but like even
again, I think the rule book is not there. You know, it is not clearly defined what a bishop is supposed to do when one of these extraordinary events happen. We do have the 1978 document, but I don't think there is an official detailed summary or detailed list of what they need to do with these approvals, because I do think some of the ones that have happened in Latin America, whether it's San Nicolas or Batania in Venezuela, I'm not sure there was consultation with Rome as well. It's a little unclear. And so they also sit in this funny position of having a bishop's approval, but the Vatican in no way has ever shown any sign of recognition of some of these more recent cases in South America. So I think that's fascinating as well.
Yeah, Batania is a great example, Michael, because as you said, the bishop made the approval and was the commission. It was his gig alone. And I understand he got a little feedback from that, but they never overturned it. So Batania still has that category. But if I remember correctly, it was only an isolated apparition or a few apparitions, you know, and Maria Esperanza had reportedly 15 years. But the bishop said, no, on this day at this event, it was Our Lady.
Yeah, this March 25th, 1984, with 108 witnesses, supposedly, that is the event that the Bishop of Los Teques is approving. So, but it is complicated because she did have apparitions on many, many other occasions. And so, but because of the one day, we'd call her an approved visionary. So it's a complicated matter that, unfortunately, because we've seen this recent rash of overturning of apparitions, I think that one is in jeopardy of being overturned just because this precedent has been set.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so the press, I mean, you do the press a lot, and the press has a basic question for you. You know, whether it's Megyn Kelly's show or these other, you know, why more apparitions now proportionately than any other time? And I think we can clearly, I think that's what the numbers crunched tell us, is that way out of proportion. We had more approved apparitions in this age of Mary, starting with St. Catherine Labouré in 1830, than any other time in history, not even close. What's your pastoral theological sense of the why? Why so many?
Yeah, so I've given this some thought, of course, and I'm a data guy, so I'm always crunching the numbers. I think my Stanford engineering degree makes my brain work that way, but I've gone through the numbers and I've tried to see where the spikes in the data are. And if we actually look after the year 2000, there are less apparitions that are being reported than the previous decade. The 1980s and 1990s, we see quite a big number. And, you know, I've had different theories about this. Perhaps it's, you know, prior to the year 2000, there's some sort of end times fears, you know, the end of the world is coming. Perhaps people were claiming visions of Mary then. Perhaps it's that 1966 statement from Paul VI on the right to mass media. you no longer had to go to your local bishop to get approval to publicly comment about apparitions. You could write a book. In modern times, you could make a website. You could disseminate those messages any way that you wanted without the explicit permission of your local bishop. And that changed everything. And I know that Father René Laurentin commented on that as well, this explosion of claims after 1966. And if you look at his Dictionary of Marian Apparitions, which is on my bookshelf somewhere, but it's quite thick, it's about this thick, approximately half the book is apparitions after 1966, and the other half is all the time in Christian history before that. So there's a great explosion after 1966 because of this loosening of the requirement to talk to the local bishop. But I'll let you comment on this a little bit as well. Starting from 1981, we have two very big apparitions happening, Cabejo in Rwanda and Medjugorje in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And if you look at the visionaries from the United States and Canada from those years, very close to 100% of the alleged visionaries in the United States had been to Medjugorje prior to receiving their visions. Now, of course, that doesn't say it's an apparition by contagion. They caught the bug and they wanted to do it too, or Mary traveled with them back to the United States. I don't know what it means, but that's what the data shows, that in the 1980s and 1990s, though that was the time of apparitions, at least alleged apparitions in the history of Christianity.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I think that's the case. I mean, I'm thinking of a few particular examples of cases that I think do merit investigation, and several of them started at Medjugorje. I see Medjugorje as just, I mean, it reminds me of Archbishop Hoser, God rest his soul, who was, the Vatican's, Pope Francis's representative in Medjugorje. And he basically said, Medjugorje is the spiritual renewal of Europe. It could be the spiritual renewal of the whole world if people responded. And always obedient, he kept on saying, "No, I'm not saying it's approved, but I'm just saying it's got massive, massive fruits," which always cracks me up a little bit, Michael, because, we talked about Laurentin's thing on my chalkboard. We talked about Seper 1978, but we kind of forgot to talk about Jesus and his only specific criterion, and that is, you'll know a tree by its fruits. So, for example, when I hear people say, look, I grant the massive Marian fruits of Medjugorje, but I don't like what this visionary did. I don't like what that did. I don't like these other elements. And I can't but think and say in some cases, look, you're forgetting the only single, which means the primordial criterion that Jesus gave. These are global fruits. And so the fact that someone could go to Medjugorje and get a grace to be, and again, we have to be careful here, because I think some people certainly went to Medjugorje and it was not something supernatural. It was something psychological or emotional with these reports. But I think there's some also that were authentic starting from there. And I think it was just a massive opening of grace. And I think it continues to be that. I mean, technically Medjugorje, as you know well, is not officially approved. I even knew that without going to the Miracle Hunter site, but I should have checked just to be sure. But anyway, when a pope is sending personal messages to 80,000 youth there, and when he's got a personal delegate that goes there, and most of all, when he declares it an official pilgrimage site of the church, that is not full approval, but it is some degree of approval. I mean, you can't take away the fact that when a bishop can lead his diocese to Medjugorje with the blessing of the Pope, that's a form of approval without inflating it to full approval. Your thoughts?
I agree. I think that, of course, it's nowhere near the constate supernaturalitate that we're always looking for to show the church's full approval. But anytime that the Pope is involved, those optics there, whether he's visiting the site or encouraging people to go to the site, I think that's significant. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but just yesterday or recently, as reported on Spirit Daily, the Bishop of Mostar actually gave an encouragement to the pilgrims visiting Medjugorje and dedicated their visit to Our Lady of Medjugorje, which Of course, previous bishops at Mostar have not been very favorable to it in any kind of a way. So I thought that was a groundbreaking item that was reported by Michael Brown.
Yeah, and that is also British understatement, Michael, to say that the previous bishops were not to. I mean, these guys were hardened against, I mean, regardless of whether you agree with them or not, I mean, it was a set agenda. I mean, the first bishop, then Bishop Zanich, but then the second bishop would actually send anti-Medjugorje things to outlets throughout the world. And so the fact that this bishop would even make an expression like Our Lady of Medjugorje, that is certainly a development. And I couldn't help but think of Knock as you were talking. And, you know, Knock for many years was middle category until what? Until the people built an airport for John Paul so he would come, which is a nice invitation. And John Paul gets off the plane and says, you know, I come to visit Our Lady of Knock. Well, then guess what? It's approved. So those are these, again, the flexibility that comes with this category of popes and bishops and apparitions.
Yeah, and again, it's so unclear, clear as mud, how it all works. But you're right, the optics of a pope visiting the site is a sign of Vatican recognition. Of course, Pope Francis has been there himself at this point, but we'll be doing an episode on my EWTN show, Explore with the Miracle Hunter. We just traveled to Knock last year, so we're doing a program on Knock and those apparitions coming up. So as an Irish guy with an O apostrophe in my last name, I'm pretty excited to do that program.
I was going to say, I was going to give you a disclaimer, you know, with that O about, you know, we're now going into pretty familiar territory with Knock, but I think you were fairly objective. So that was nicely done. So since we're talking about the mother always wants us talking about the son also, let's talk a little bit about Eucharistic miracles. And so, you know, the traditional giant is, of course, Lanciano, right? And in terms of its appreciation and its kind of universality. But now we've got two Polish miracles that are really extraordinary. Could you give us a summation of the Lanciano? I've been at a presentation when you were talking about this. The Lanciano evidence compared to or in congruity with these two Polish Eucharistic miracles?
Yeah, and I have to say this year, particularly when we're talking about this time of Eucharistic revival in the Catholic Church, when I do give presentations, people are asking me to talk about Eucharistic miracles because it's on people's mind, the Eucharist, and then we're and people are interested in Eucharistic miracles because as you go to my website miraclehunter.com, you can go through any number of categories: Marian Apparitions, or stigmata, or incorruptibles, or healing miracles. But with all these cases, there's always a little bit of doubt, in my opinion. We have to approach these with faith, because even in these cases that of Marian apparitions like Fatima, Lourdes, Guadalupe, we're saying that we have a good visionary who's a reliable witness who has testified to the reality of Mary appearing, and the church says it is worthy of belief that this testimony is good. Of course, we must bring our faith to it and say that, yes, we believe this is really happening, but there's always a little bit of doubt. In the case of a Eucharistic miracle, we're dealing with something that's verifiable by science, which for many people is very exciting. Yeah. So we're talking about less than 100 times in Christian history, there have been a certain type of Eucharistic miracle, and much smaller the number where we have true flesh and true blood manifesting on a consecrated Eucharistic host that's been tested by science. And perhaps the first of this type of amazing miracle is Lanciano in Italy, which happened in around the year 700 or between 700 and 750 AD. And we have the story of a Basilian monk who was, he had doubts about his faith, and he perhaps prayed for a sign, or he was not sure what to do. But during Mass one day, he elevated the host in consecration, and it began to bleed and turn to flesh. And all the people at the Mass saw this as well. And this Eucharistic host, this true flesh and true blood, and visible flesh and blood made manifest, is still preserved in Lanciano, Italy, even to this day. So even parts of that church are original to the original Mass where that happened. And scientists in the 1970s and beyond have investigated this, and they found that it is human flesh It's got blood type AB, which is the same as the blood type of the Shroud of Turin. And it turns out every subsequent Eucharistic miracle is also blood type AB. Absolutely fascinating. And there's been no preservatives in this sample as well. And the blood and the flesh match. They have a chalice with globules of blood that match. So it's truly amazing. They've done full scientific analysis of this. And as you've been to Lanciano, I know that you have, Mark, but you can walk up very close and genuflect and kneel in front of this Eucharistic miracle. It's absolutely amazing. It's probably my favorite Eucharistic miracle site in the entire world. It's truly a place to see.
Yeah, it is stunning, and the proximity is amazing. I mean, it's not like, you need binoculars. You go right up there. And sadly, typically, you don't have to wait too long. There's not a lot of people there. And it's like, what does the Lord have to do? How many miracles does he have to do when we're not, as you say, these are elements that science confirms without question, and still we're not impressed. I quite frankly, I think that's one reason there's so many Marian apparitions today. I think it's, when the press asks me, it's, well, A, thank God for the generosity of heaven sending the mother. B, it's because we're not doing such a good job of living the gospel, because that's the purpose of Marian private revelation. And
Exactly.
I would say
that's always been my answer. We need it the most right now than we've ever needed it. So perhaps the reason we have so many reports. But you asked about Poland, Legnica, Sokolka, 2008 and 2013. And I was able to travel there this year. It was April that I was in both of those locations. And I got to speak with the parish priests who were there witnessing this miracle when it happened. And I did an interview with them, which will air on EWTN as part of a Eucharistic Miracles mini-series, which will be coming out in July of 2024. Sokolka, Legnica, Lanciano, Buenos Aires, and Tixla, Mexico, five of the most absolutely studied cases that will blow your mind. And I've got all the interviews with the experts. So I think this is going to be a big deal when I can pull this all together with my editors for next year. But at those two places, Lanciano or Legnica and Sokolka, we see cases where a host was discovered, discarded perhaps in the back of the church, or the host was dropped in one of the cases, and they reserved it in water in the vasculum, as is the tradition. And then sometime later, they revisited the tabernacle and saw this host exhibiting some redness. And so in many cases, when this happens, it's red bread mold. That's what science establishes that it is. But in these particular cases, they found it was true human flesh manifesting on that host. And a few interesting aspects. It's heart muscle from the myocardium, both samples, which matches Lanciano as well. Blood type AB matching Lanciano as well. And what I think is maybe the most fascinating aspect is you have your naysayers and doubters who will say, couldn't somebody who really knew what they were doing get some blood type AB blood, sneak in, drop that droplet on top of that host, and couldn't that fool all these silly Catholics who think this? Couldn't that be an ultimate hoax? Well, it turns out that on an electron microscopic level, they find that the blood is actually effusing from inside the host, not the outside. And they find that the flesh and the bread, as it was, is perfectly integrated. It's a complete matrix going from one to the other. You can't tell where one starts and one stops. It's completely integrated. And so there's no human technology that knows how to do that. So they couldn't even make a fake Eucharistic miracle that way if they wanted to. So the science is absolutely incredible. And I'm so excited to present this evidence next year in this program.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And can you say a word about the difference between the two Polish Eucharistic miracles? I mean, how do you distinguish the two? Are they very similar, or
they're very similar in the sense that they came from a dropped host that was put in water according to that practice. So one was 2008, one was 2013. In the one case, in the course of time, as is the intention of putting a host in water, the host had dissolved quite a bit, leaving only the flesh, mostly only the flesh. So they actually scooped the flesh part out and put it on something to be studied by the scientists. And that is what exists in the church today. is that that small piece of flesh. So the one is a much larger piece, the other is a much smaller piece. That's the distinction in my mind. But as far as the science goes behind it, like I mentioned, both blood type AB, both heart muscle from the myocardium, and both fully integrated, the bread and the flesh. So
and also
truly a remarkable case. Yeah.
It's phenomenal. And I remember, if I remember correctly, they can tell chemically that this is live tissue, right? This is not just preserved past tissue. It's putting forward chemicals that bespeak a living organism tissue.
And one of the key points there is that in these cases, and we see this also in Buenos Aires in Argentina, the finding of white blood cells. And so white blood cells, as any biologist would tell you, will die within minutes after death. And so the fact that they're able to see white blood cells in these samples that have been in water up to years at times is absolutely remarkable. That just shouldn't happen.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And again, it just bespeaks our Lord's generosity. I mean, he's just coming to us and giving us, I mean, he can't take away our freedom. That's his biggest gift. He's not going to do that. But he's getting as close as possible of that border and giving us things like, the Shrine of Guadalupe. I was talking with a Jewish convert, and he kept exclaiming, "Why do you Catholics not?" And he's Catholic now, but why don't you promulgate this stuff more? The fact that Our Lady of Guadalupe, the Shroud of Turin, these are. Reason cannot deny these. And it's a good point, but it's also, the value of the stuff you're doing to make this available, and to make it available with a reasonable, a scholarly and an empirically precise process, which is great. All right. Great job, Michael. I'm going to ask you one last question, and you can duck this if you want, because you've done pretty far so far. You've done pretty well. I mean, you've been hitting these on. So tell me what you think about the Fifth Marian Dogma, Michael.
I was wondering if you were going to ask about that. So you think
I didn't
have
want
an
to
answer?
just feed it with my stuff. I'm trying to be a good host. So yeah. What's your feeling about a Fifth Marian Dogma?
Of course, these dogmas in the history of the church have been very important, and anytime we see Mary coming to the fore like this, and it helps our faith. It gives us insight. It excites us, and it draws us closer to Mary, and as a result to Christ. So the proclamation of Marian dogmas are very important. And of course, through your work, we've got the Fifth Marian Dogma being proposed, and the question is, will this happen, and should it happen? Those are two different questions, I think. I think those people who would perhaps argue against the Fifth Marian Dogma would say this will be too damaging to Christian unity. Protestants perhaps might not fully get on board with Mary as Co-Redemptrix or mediatrix. So I think that's some people see it as a stumbling block, but will it happen is another question. It seems that Pope Francis perhaps is not as open to it as one may be wishing for in this case. And I often wonder if some of the condemnations of the Marian Apparitions that have mediatrix in the title are somewhat related to the opposition to this Fifth Marian Dogma. I'm not sure, but we'll have to wait and see if this Pope or the next one opens it up. But I think it would be a big deal for the Church if we did have that Fifth Marian Dogma proclaimed. Yeah.
Well, I agree. I think it would be a historic event. And there's an interesting byline about Pope Francis, the World Youth Day, a miraculous healing of a young girl, a young woman, maybe in her teens, from a blindness, and this connection with Our Lady of the Snows. Now, Our Lady of the Snows is not your blockbuster novena. I mean, in the sense that it's not, it's not like a Fatima thing or even a Medjugorje thing, or I would even say Lady of All Nations. I mean, it's ancient, it's beautiful, it's profound, but it's rather remote. And the fact that she's praying this novena to Our Lady of the Snows for a miraculous healing of her eyes, she had lost 95% of her sight, is remarkable. And it's also remarkable with the connection of Our Lady of the Snows and Pope Francis, the fact that Pope Francis goes to that site in St. Mary Major's before every major trip and returns back, and he had just gone there and comes over. It seems like if you didn't want to encourage Pope Francis, Our Lady of the Snows, and World Youth Day at Fatima, you wouldn't have a miracle. So I think that's a rather interesting continuity that comes forward for this. Have you read of this?
Yeah, I'm working on trying to get her on my radio show for an interview. The girl who's had the healing from blindness, and we did a program on Explore on EWTN where we talked about Our Lady of the Snows. It's an amazing thing from in August of 352 AD, where a man, John, and his wife, they pray what to do with their money, and the Mary appears to them in a dream and says, go to the top of this hill in Rome, and the Pope Liberius has the same dream, and they meet on the top of the hill, and there's this outline of snow of what will become St. Mary Major. It's really a fun story, and on every August 5th, we see white rose petals dropped from St. Mary Major's ceiling. So it's a great tradition of that Our Lady of the Snows. And I think the timing of Pope Francis being there during the novena to Our Lady of the Snows, starting on August 5th, perhaps that's the timing, what inspired her to have that reach out to Our Lady of the Snows for this help. But it's an incredible story, and I hope I do get that interview because I think it's pretty inspiring.
Yeah, good. Well, I agree. And I was just there about 6 weeks ago with a pilgrimage group from Ave Maria University. August heat, I mean, the expressions of the Romans is, solo i stranieri sono in Roma questo tempo. Only the foreigners are in Rome at this time because all the Romans get out. It's just too hot. And to have that is just a beautiful testimony. So, the mother just continues to be the force. And I think the sooner we get the idea that she is not just a remedy, but the remedy given by God, and that comes forward from Fatima and throughout the whole Marian age, I think the sooner we'll get peace. So, but listen, Michael, thank you for a fascinating interview. I think almost as good as our conversations, during dinner, pretty close. We'll see right after we get off the set what you say, and I'll compare it to what we just said and see whether it's there. But listen, thanks for coming on, and thanks for all that you do for making this stuff known, but also with a great credibility and a great faith. So God bless you for your great work.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be with you today. Thank you.
All right. So thank you for being with us for Mariology Without Apology. And we'll continue in this process of giving you a little bit more meat in terms of the truth about Our Lady, but always with love. God bless you all.